Today we're going to talk about the Emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, his meditations or discourse with himself. I don't know if it was one of y'all who pointed it out to me, but that these are from his like private writings. They're not ones he wrote intentionally for a public viewing, and so that makes
Yeah,
them pretty interesting in that regard. Did anyone besides myself get around to reading book one today? For
I
today,
finished it literally 5 minutes ago, so
nice.
I did manage
Same.
to get the whole thing.
I did not read this version because I've read
I
the
also read
book
it.
four.
Nice.
Mm,
So Piers Charles has also read it, so they're ready too.
gonna turn
All
same.
right. Perfect. So to oh, and just as a starter, real quick, I mentioned it in the chat, but is everybody okay with combining books two and three for the next time we discuss this book? Um,
I don't really have any objections to that.
okay. If you have no objections, I'd like to do that. I think they're pretty short. I think Ben agreed with me. Yes, he said he was in favor of it.
Mm.
Um, And Sam also agrees that combining would probably be fine. Okay, so we're gonna do that for next time. But this today, as our introduction to meditations, we're gonna just do book one. And so for me, and as Ben pointed out, it feels like he's just listing all these super positive things. Of wow, look at all
Did
these great things I learned.
did y'all read the introduction?
I did. I browsed the introduction, but I didn't want to add it in necessarily to today's discussion. Is there something in specific that you felt like
Well,
was?
it gives some context specifically to the first book being in its entirety him thanking people for his various
Mm-hmm.
attributes. That's just it's what it is.
Yeah, I love it though. I like
Oh
the
yes,
vibes of the book.
he has a lot to say about Antoninus Pius.
He does. He does. I think that I really appreciate. I've been personally reflecting on some negativity I've been indulging in, and so I appreciated the really high amount of positive energy I got after finishing book one. And also, I I like that this is somebody's uploaded copy because I get to see where they marked what they thought was important.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah,
So I'm kind of enjoying that addition
like
too.
like what notes were you taking?
Yeah, I like it.
I mostly learned that I'm not a virtuous person at all.
ben
Oh
Ben
man,
discovered that he's awful, and
we're gonna. This the problem with this particular version of Stoicism is it's gonna lead us in a circle to talking about virtue ethics eventually, and that's not going to be great
I don't know.
because I don't like virtue ethics.
Oh, interesting.
Well, I mean, basically, in context, they talk about virtue. Okay, cool. What is virtue? Who decides what it is?
Mm-hmm.
That from there it goes. I'm okay with Marcus Aurelius telling me what virtue is because he seems to have a good head on his shoulders. You
He's
know,
got this covered. He's good. Yeah.
and
Yeah, that was also some confusion I fell into because on the one hand I was sort of tossed between this whole dichotomy. On the one hand,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is this virtue and this is something to strive for, and on the other hand, the whole apparently immorality that can be observed in nature. So, and I mean, he also talks about living according to nature, and I was thinking about what does that even mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that led me down this whole rabbit hole of what is masculinity and what is blah blah blah, masculinity according to nature, and does that even exist? And yeah, it's a whole thing.
I actually appreciated that about this reading for myself. I similarly had thoughts of like, why is this being listed as a virtue? What does it mean for that to be something that's considered virtuous? And but I think you and I went down slightly different considerations. It sounds like.
uh, I do want to point out, and I Actually, I don't remember if I actually read through meditations during college, but a lot of everything that, like the context of when this was written, I
Mhm.
did. And so much of that came back reading this morning. I was like, oh man, I forgot about some of this. But that there are answers to those specific things in what he is referring to when
Mhm.
he says nature, when he says masculinity. There are well defined understandings of his time of what these concepts were that are very different from, or not always very different, but have differences to what we would use for those words, or maybe we have there's some ambiguity and we could use them in multiple ways, but they did not.
Mhm.
So when he's talking about nature, usually that has to do with virtue in the idea of there is a way that we ought to act. There is an inherent good thing that we should always be striving for, and then something else that has, these rather unscrupulous activities, or these things that he's saying, oh, we shouldn't do. Like, actually, this, as much as this is about being grateful and recognizing what traits that he has and how he's glad that he's developed them and where they came from, it also gives us a really telling
Mhm.
picture of what is virtuous or what is good and what should people do and what shouldn't people do and what is difficult but necessary to do, and he spells that out very clearly in the way, confidently as well, and in a way too, obviously this isn't written for the public, but there's no, oh, it seems like this is a good thing. It's like very definite. This is virtuous. This is
This
something
is
I'm
the
glad that I
thing.
have. Yeah. And that wasn't, I mean, on top of the just those kinds of words that Ben had pointed out, there are a few other things too that definitely require context. Like a couple pages in, when he's talking about his the emperor, when he's talking about the emperor, and he says he learned how a prince should be and all this, and then he talks about boy favorites, and then
Yeah.
later
Mm-hmm.
he talks about his own something about himself not engaging in pederasty, like on the other end of it when he was young,
Mhm.
and it's not like spelled out in a very plain way for somebody who didn't know that that was a common practice in Rome at the time.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, I had forgotten about that,
Yeah.
that was a thing going on, and it was a really big deal to him apparently. And also, that was contrary to what a lot of people were doing and encouraged to do in the time that
Right.
he wrote it. And he
Mhm.
only spent a couple of lines mentioning those things, but he did mention it multiple times. So I think that that's another important thing. Like, he didn't just accept everything that
Yes.
was culturally acceptable. He really thought about these things, and that in particular he thought was quite important.
Mhm. I think those are great points. It's awesome. Um. Yeah. Well, and then like you said, this isn't written for the public, so he's not writing to persuade us of anything, and I think that's why we're seeing such a confident voice, such a surety of his beliefs. Right? He's not trying to convince us of his beliefs. He just like, this is my belief. This is it. And I kind of like that. It's a bit of a change from the writing styles we've been really reviewing. So I like it. Um, here on the first couple pages, let's see. He just has some very basic virtues that he's kind of pointing at right now in these first couple pages of both modest and manly, as Ben and I were talking about. And then I thought it was interesting. He pointed out a plain, inexpensive way. And then I personally laughed at not to join either the green or the blue faction because of the political state of the U.S. And then um, interesting that amongst all of these virtues, that one is encouraged to partake in business. Um, and maybe this is too much of a logical leap, but I thought about talking about how it reminds me of conscientious consumerism. And forgive me if this is too far of a mental leap. My brain works in mysterious ways, as it were. And I find that it's interesting to me that I get the sense that it would be less virtuous to not partake in them, if that makes sense.
It does
I
not make
I
sense to me.
I kind of see where you're coming. I kind of see where you're coming from. I'm not. I have to reread just to make sure I'm understanding it correctly.
Hmm.
But yeah, I could see that. Just the idea that you're supposed to engage in business, and if you're not engaging in business, something wrong with you. I don't. Clearly, I don't agree with it, but
Yeah, I don't know. It was just an interesting thought that crossed my mind while reading it.
I,
I,
I actually read this sentence a little bit differently when he says, "Put my own hand to business," and especially in the context of what comes after. That reads to me as if he was told basically to get his own hands dirty and do some physical labor even, so not to rely purely on servants for that or whatever, but yeah, to know what's like to do a hard day's work.
Right. No, yeah, that's a great insight on that too, I think.
Yeah, I also believe it was intended more on that front, not about engaging in business,
mhm.
but more in the sense of when people say like let's get down to business in the figurative sense, because the qualifier after to endure hardship and fatigues, like it seems more
Mhm. Okay.
like
Yeah.
working hard to make something of yourself or make something for yourself. And also that idea of like being productive, a big part of this mentality I think was contributing to society and for the common good and all of that, and that
Mhm.
would fit into it. Now it's not to say that conscientious consumerism doesn't maybe couldn't be some kind of extension of that mindset of being aware of how your own actions are affecting a greater whole and the good of the whole community and those kinds of things. I think it would follow. I don't think that's what he's referring to here, but there's
No,
still
not
some kind of
necessarily.
relevance to that.
Ah, the places my brain goes. Um, I liked the. Let's see. I highlighted. He taught me to write letters in a plain, unornamental style, and I thought that was interesting because it reminds me of how sometimes we exchange information on Discord quite a bit, which is a lot like really fast letters, right? That's always what texting and messaging has been likened to. And I was thinking about how easy sometimes it is to get flowery with language. It was something I thought about back in ye old zealous Christian days, and how language was a barrier to understanding if you weren't conscious of your audience and what language they may be able to absorb easily. So I thought that was kind of
Mm.
fun.
I mean, it also contrasts with the writing in the introduction, which is not plain and unornamental.
Hmm.
So I find that interesting at the very least.
I love that point. I was thinking the same thing when I was reading the intro. I'm like, wait, let me reread the sentence. All right, that was a lot. That was a lot of like that's 6 lines of one sentence with 6 lines, and that was a lot of words to simply say he and his brother worked together in the Empire. Like you didn't need to write 6 lines to say that. They worked together in the Empire like the father had wanted. That is
The
all you needed to say. Like
the the only defense I have for the writing style is that it was in fact written in 1887.
Yeah.
Well, published in 1887, probably written in like 86 or something, but still.
Hmm. Hmm.
I give a lot of credit for okay, you write like you're in the 19th century. I suppose that's fair.
That's fair. It seems to really emphasize, a lot, and he hits it a couple times of almost be like, just have like a really even attitude. Just be really even. Don't get too excited. Don't get too unexcited. Don't get angry.
Don't give in to your passions,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, whether they're negative or positive passions, don't give in to them, it seems.
yeah, I laughed a little bit at the part where he said something about not treating like about how you're supposed to treat your friends, and some of it was, to be patient with them and things like that. And then one of them was to not treat them with fondness. I was like, huh, okay.
Yeah, that was weird. I had to think about that one for sure. I was like, interesting. I think I may have
Yeah,
highlighted it. I don't remember.
I think maybe
that
it means
that
like don't
also
show them
struck me as
favoritism,
strange.
like more along those lines than not be. Yeah, I don't know.
It might be a strange translation or another case of like there are some words that he uses that people would just know what that was, or he would know what that was, and
Mm-hmm.
it changes a little now. So maybe fondness could be something that is either an approximate translation but not entirely accurate, or maybe it meant something that was a word commonly used at the time to be for
Uh,
for specific things that we don't know.
of the three versions I read, I glanced upon that are free to the public to read. This one was my favorite. It was the most readable. um, it was. Oh, I highlighted this sentence. I learned not to grow wise by starts and sudden fancies, but to be a constant admirer of philosophy and improvement. And I thought that that was a nice little way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it Sometimes it feels like I've hit a revelation and I'm at the cusp of enlightenment, and I want to like leap forward, right? And I almost appreciate this reminder to absorb things mindfully. I know he doesn't put it that way, but it very much has that vibe of I need to be mindful with the information coming in, even if it's true, and not just rush to accept it and incorporate it into my schema.
Yeah, I think he's also talking about like you can't just be like, huh, I'm interested in this. I read a little thing or engaged with it briefly, and now I'm going to put it down and say, oh, yes, I'm a wise man because I read that once. Instead,
Hmm.
it's an everyday effort. You have to put in effort all the time. It can't just be like, and I'm sure this must be a criticism of some particular people who were at the time suddenly saying, I am now enlightened, or I know the truth because I spent 2 days really interested in this and now I don't have to deal with it ever again. Instead of the people who really dedicate themselves to, with discipline to study and improve themselves because it is a work.
Yeah. Um, Charles is poked about Marcus's grandfather's commentary on the public schools, and I am trying to remember what
I
exactly
think he
he said.
basically said he was glad that he didn't have to go to a public
Oh
school,
yeah,
but
he was like, "I'm glad I was homeschooled,"
that he had all those amazing teachers come to him.
which is great. I think it was cool that he got to have that experience. Um, I don't think Marcus made an outright like down with public school, but like Ben said, he's just grateful for the learning he got to do.
Yeah, I think it was a quality commentary. Not that he thought that it wasn't, obviously public school is better than no school, but he clearly thought that his education was of a superior quality to what other people may have been getting. And I mean, it should be if you have one-on-one student engagement compared to like an entire group of people. I would hope they can tailor it better to you, right?
So I highlighted this one sentence because it confused me and made me laugh, which was, "It was none of his custom to bathe at unusual hours."
Yeah.
I was like, what does that mean?
Yeah, what is an unusual hour to bathe?
And all I could think was
Three
like,
in the
they
morning?
must mean in a public bathhouse. And then
Yeah.
beyond that, I couldn't figure out what the most unusual hour would be. Are we talking like lunchtime? Are we talking middle of the night to see the the people who get money for certain activities, or or are we? What are we talking about here?
Nice dodge.
I know. But it was just kind of interesting. I don't know. I was like, huh, that must be a very cultural connection that I'm not quite. There was nothing of ruggedness, immodesty, or eagerness in his temper. I wish I could push that into my students' brains.
Find it another word I find strange to see here is eagerness because well eagerness isn't doesn't strike me as a bad
Mhm.
thing per se. So that's yeah
Well,
also
in the
interesting to note.
in the broader context, though, he does say earlier that one of the things he values learning is to not be too taken in by anything, and that eagerness is along those lines.
Okay, that's fair, yeah.
Yeah, maybe in contrast to patience,
Hmm.
eagerness versus patience. It's
Mm.
the attitude about how you approach. Like I'm sure he would agree with eagerness in the sense of I have a desire to learn about something or to, I want to engage with this,
Yeah.
but maybe not so much in that like very energetic go go go
Mm.
attitude.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That you should be a little bit more easygoing about how you approach everything.
I'm not a good stoic. I'm very much a go 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 person. Even if it comes across as like, "Ooh, what a great employee! Look at her getting all those things done." Probably to my great disadvantage emotionally.
Mm.
Um, then he said a lot of things that I was like, "This is nice," but didn't highlight anything. Um, but I like that he recognized, like, look at all these people. I turned out great.
Can I just almost specifically call out on where is it? Is it page 18 or 19?
Mhm.
Here it is something about I'm glad, or it might be on 17. Like I'm glad that my children are neither stupid nor misshapen.
Oh yeah, that was
There it is. There it
hilarious.
is. There it is.
That was
Top of page 18.
hilarious.
Like what are you? What the? What the fuck are you saying?
He is glad his child does not have any sort of mental disability or physical malady.
It goes to show the difference between cultures, because that's not a thing that a parent would ever be okay to say in 2023.
No,
It's
we
still
say, "Oh,
something
I'm
that's
so glad they're
realistic.
healthy. I'm so glad they're
Oh,
healthy."
right. No,
Um,
if he had said I'm glad that my children are healthy, that is completely contextually different.
I will say, once again, this is in his private writings. Additionally, it is a different time where, somebody who has a disability, whether it's physical or mental, is going to be severely disadvantaged in a way that is not the same today. Like, we have a lot of, while we're still working towards getting, great at it, we have a lot more accommodations for those who are not built like the neurotypical or the physiotypical. What do you what do
Hmm.
you even
Yeah,
say?
Able-bodied?
Able-bodied.
Able-bodied, yeah, that seems to.
Able-bodied. So like we have a lot of accommodations to account for those sorts of disadvantages, right? But back
Hmm.
Yeah.
then, you'd be pretty much screwed over. You'd be like, "Nope. Goodbye bye. Have a good time with Romulus and Remus out in the wild. Bye."
I mean,
Hmm.
yeah, you don't have wheelchairs
Time to go
or
get
I mean,
raised by wolves.
braille or glasses or
Yeah.
Yeah, I think about that one in particular. I'm blind without
Oh,
my
I would
glasses.
be doomed with my eyeballs.
yes, same. Hmm.
and then the kinds of accommodations that you would personally have to make to try to help or take care of somebody more or less single-handedly. Like
Yeah.
at least now we have institutions that can assist, we have doctors that know what to do about certain illnesses and conditions, and there's a whole, even if you have to pay them, there are
Right.
people who can support. There are groups, like there are literally support groups out there of other people who have the same. And if you think of a much smaller city which much fewer resources and technology and just knowledge about any of those things. I mean, that's valid. That his life would have been really different if he had children who had had some kind of disability.
Yep. Yeah. No, that.
Materially different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the last page.
Yep. I do like that on the whole this entire chapter is just him saying, "Hey, I'm thankful for, the way I have turned out."
I kind of wouldn't mind if more books started that way.
Yeah.
This struck me as well. Of like we ribbed on the other book for not like the dude not checking his privilege, and that's how this all kind of came across to me. Like, here's all the things I'm thankful for. Yes, I acknowledge that. Like, I've had a really good time.
I've had a really good time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that straightforwardness because it means whatever he says next, I'm able to he recognizes where he's had an advantage. You know. I I I continue to have difficult time with somebody who's writing like, and while I was strolling down the promenade of Rome, I would, like during my 3 week vacation. I just anyway, sorry. Supposed to be positive.
It is a stark contrast, though, isn't it? Especially being about a very similar topic.
Yeah.
And it is somehow more relatable despite literally being the son of an emperor and living in a palace and like
Yeah.
running an entire empire. Like he became the emperor. He was an emperor. Actually, when he wrote this, I believe he was emperor, right? And
No.
he
Yeah.
it's still much more down to earth. And he doesn't have to pretend to be relatable, which I mean, yeah, also he's not trying to because it's
Well,
private,
he's
but
not thinking I must be relatable to people, right? He's just writing. He's just like,
yeah.
oh man, thankful for all this stuff that happened in my life. Wow.
Uh-huh. And also I think this is a very good way to start things for the reader to say, well, if he's the kind of person who observes in this way, who
Mhm.
thinks about not only himself, because how long he would have had to sit there and think, what kinds of qualities do I have and why am I like this?
Yeah.
What did I learn from people and how and what are these different characters in his life like? What are their qualities and why are they the way that they are and how were they able to pass that on to me? And analyzing that and then naming all of that sets us up
Yeah.
in a very good position for any kind of other analysis that he does because we can see like all of this makes sense. Which, of course, Stoicism too, logic and reasoning and all of that. But it
Yeah.
he's for the proof is in the pudding, right?
The proof is in the pudding.
He's demonstrating his ability to do what we need to trust that he can do for the remainder of what we're about to read, which is something that the last author failed to do. We didn't have any faith in his ability to comprehend what he read, much less actually draw any
Yeah.
reasonable or
Mhm.
useful understanding from his own life experiences. Like,
Mhm.
this is going to be a really different experience.
I agree. Anybody else have some cool thoughts they want to share regarding this very brief reading? Really should have probably combined books 1 and 2, but here we are.
Well, as it is, I'm glad because I had just enough time to actually read it all.
Yeah. there is an element personally of skepticism for a lot of this stuff because as we noted, Marcus Aurelius was the adopted son of an emperor, and then later an emperor.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
on its surface, it's a little hard to take someone who is literally the leader of the most powerful nation on a continent saying it doesn't really matter if you're rich or poor. Seriously, it's
Yeah.
hard to. It's hard to. But when you start off with 17, 19 straight pages of, I acknowledge that I am this way, here are the people who have taught me the things that I know, it goes a long way to help.
He also chose, and although choosing is having a choice is part of the privilege, but he did choose to live not the life of an emperor. Like before he became emperor, he
Mm-hmm.
kind of distanced himself from a lot of that lifestyle and like, and especially the time of trying to understand the philosophers and like live like philosophers, which is essentially extremely poor to an even higher degree than what people who were living in poverty dealt with, because they're very, shun all comforts and all of that. It's not the same as not, obviously if things got very bad, he could have always just gone home,
Mm-hmm.
but
Right, he got to live knowing he had
I
a support network if necessary, but
but I think the point is that he also tried, like, he did those things because it was the point of you don't necessarily need all that stuff. Like, nobody, the things that are actually necessary and important for a good life are not in the wealth,
The
yeah.
fact that he
it's in
made
the mindset.
the fact that he made an attempt to walk the walk as well is, yes, very good.
I have to tell you, I'm amused by the similarity with the Siddhartha Buddha story of like I
Mm-hmm.
come from a palace and I've chosen not to live in
Yes.
palace.
Maybe it's just a thing noble kids go through. It's just a phase.
It's just a phase. Cool beans. Good job, team.